the Trumps and the royal family and all of that. So I know you're saying Roy Cohn, was like been Trump's main, I don't know what you'd call him, confidant or advisor.
Well, mentor, and that's that's straight from the horse's mouth, really. And pretty much, if you Google Roy Cohn mentor Trump, I mean, you'll see tons of articles. I would encourage you to do that, actually, so you can see how close they were. Roy Cohn is on, he told a bunch of, like media outlets not long before he died that he thinks Donald Trump is the only real genius he'd ever met in his life. And they first met in the early 1970s and were really close for a really long time. And according to Roy Cohn's longtime secretary, the last person that Roy Cohn talked to before he died was Donald Trump. And so they were really close. According to Roy Cohn, Trump would call him around 17 times a day, asking, what is the status of this? And what is the status of that? That's more or less an indirect quotation. So Roy Cohn and Donald Trump were super close. Roy Cohn was also a mentor to Roger Stone, who a lot of people will know for his dirty tricks going back to the Nixon administration and all the way up to the Trump administration today. Mm-hmm. So why is this significant? So Roy Cohn, beginning in the 1950s, when he was general counsel to Joseph McCarthy during the McCarthy hearings, got involved in a sexual blackmail operation that exploited underage boys and abused them and was used for sexual blackmail purposes. And it was done. Roy Cohn was one of the main people involved. The guy that really started it was this guy named Louis Rosenstiel, who was the owner of Schenley Liquors, which is a huge liquor company that's been absorbed into the brand names of today. And he really got his start during Prohibition and was a well-known, mob-linked businessman, specifically linked to people like Mayor Lansky and all of that. And I think last time I was on, we talked about how Mayor Lansky had all these ties to intelligence, both in the U.S. and Israel, and had really pioneered the sexual blackmail stuff back in the 30s. And Louis Rosenstiel had started his own sort of out of his personal house in the 40s. And so Roy Cohn eventually took this over. And they were doing it also with J. Edgar Hoover, the director of the FBI, or at least he was present there. Hoover was at a lot of the stuff. And Hoover, if you look at his history, was well known for trying to get as much blackmail on as many people as possible, whether he loved them or he hated them.
Right.
Right. So eventually Roy Cohn moves this out or takes this to starts running this out of a hotel in Manhattan called the Plaza Hotel. And he was running it out of a suite that was called the Blue Suite. And a lot of people, that was nicknamed that. And a lot of people, it comes up in documents from divorce filings of Louis Rosenstiel's ex-wife. It comes up on the early 1970s crime investigation into organized crime. And also, according to former NYPD detective, I think the head of the Vice Division, Jim Rothstein, Roy Cohn admitted to James Rothstein's face that he was doing this and that he quote unquote ran the little boys, and that this was part of that began as part of the anti-communist crusade of the time as a way for this political faction that Roy Cohn was a part of to gain and maintain political control. And that continued, well after that. And there were several other blackmail rings that were known to be connected to Cohn's, including one that was run by CIA agent Edwin Wilson, who later went to prison. But in the 70s, Edwin Wilson was running one as well in collusion with this guy that was really close to Bill Casey, of the former director of the CIA, whose name was Robert Keith Gray. Robert Keith Gray also ran a PR firm, and two of his main clients were Adnan Khashoggi, who was the Iran Contra arms dealer we just talked about, and also Mark Rich, who's another Assad-connected businessman. So,
and this is also the uncle of Jamal Khashoggi that was murdered.
Yeah, Adnan Khashoggi is the uncle of Jamal Khashoggi.
Okay.
And Jamal Khashoggi was also involved in a lot of weird stuff with the CIA in the 80s as well. Like he was involved with Mujahideen in Afghanistan with Osama bin Laden and all that stuff during this time. So Jamal Khashoggi's past is also pretty odd, but it's unfortunate what happened to him. But that whole family is really tied into this murky world of intelligence, for sure. And we're also involved with BCCI, right? That CIA bank.
Right. So then the Roy Cohn, the parties then in the 80s is where he sort of where we started to hear Trump's name come up with these.
Right. So Roy Cohn dies in 1986, and he had gotten really ill by like 1985. So presumably he wasn't running that much of this anymore at that point, and someone else may have taken it over. But not long after he died, Donald Trump bought the same hotel, and according to people that attended these parties, he had very some disturbing things went on there, and there was allegedly, from the people that were there, right, a lot of drugs. A lot of young women that had been promised, that they could advance their careers by associating with these old wealthy guys and things like that, but that the wealthy guys had no intent, according to people that planned these parties, had no intent of helping these girls just exploiting them. And one guy, when he was asked by a reporter how old were the women there, because he had said young women and girls, his first reaction was to say 14, and then he backed up and said, "Oh, I don't know, 24. I don't know," and got all weird. So there's been speculation from not just from him, from that report, but from others, that there may have been sort of a don't ask, don't tell policy of bringing underage girls to this hotel that, at least in terms of people that were insiders in New York, was known to have minor the exploitation of minors sexually. So it's kind of disturbing. What went on even after Trump purchased the hotel, and the fact that Trump, was willingly, considered Roy Cohn his mentor when, Roy Cohn was involved with all this stuff. And, something that happened with Jeffrey Epstein, right, is that if you looked at the reporting before he was arrested and what people would say about him, including Donald Trump, they would say stuff like, "Oh, he liked women on the younger side." A lot of people that were around Jeffrey Epstein noticed that he was often accompanied by these girls, who were clearly underage. So the same thing actually happened with Roy Cohn. Roger Stone, I think it was the New Yorker, said, "Yeah, Roy Cohn was always surrounded by these young blonde boys, but we just never talked about it." So it was, same sort of deal seemed to have been going on there.
Well, the thing that is so sort of alarming is just the interconnectedness of all of these very powerful people.
Yeah.
And one of the things that came up, I did a video on Jeffrey Epstein's assistants, and there was the MC2 or M2, that fake modeling agency, and the modeling industry.
With Jean-Luc Brunel and the France stuff, right?
Is so connected. And it was the modeling industry, right, on the whole, is pretty detestable, let alone just flat out fake agencies that are used for child trafficking.
Right. Well, I haven't looked into this, but I think someone should, because not just, Jean-Luc Brunel had that fake modeling agency. Jeffrey Epstein had a fake modeling agency as well. And Donald Trump had one that looked really similar to what Jeffrey Epstein's modeling agency, and all these, something was off about them model agencies. A lot of people had this sort of stuff. So I definitely think that needs to be looked into, but I haven't pursued that, with my research, but someone totally should. Because what better way to, exploit young women, telling them, "Oh, come to this party, come to this event, and it will help advance your career." And then there's all this, it's just a free for all to exploit them, or entrap them, which happened to some of the girls that got, entrapped by Epstein.
Yeah. And then there's links to Naomi Campbell,
right,
being involved in this. I mean, it's really just like, they find their children, at age 14 or whatever, some cases younger, and tell them you're going to be a famous model. And then they're put into these horrible situations where they're sexually abused.
Yeah, because they specifically sought out girls that were from troubled homes with troubled economic situations. And they would say things like, "You're really pretty, you could, make a name for yourself. You could make a lot of money," stuff like that. I mean, if you're a young girl who's impressionable and you're in a difficult domestic and financial situation, I mean, that sort of stuff seems like a dream come true, but it's really just shows how sick these people are.
Well, and
how willing they are to manipulate, these young girls in bad situations. It's just so depraved. Yeah.
Jeffrey Epstein joked about how everyone has a price. There was a bunch of young
Yeah.
poor girls from France, and he just paid the parents, oh, they're going to come over and study with me or whatever, and the parents were just like, sure, and he joked about how easy it was to just buy these poor girls